Welcome back to another episode of Rock Boys Football. Coach Prime, the Colorado Buffaloes, kicking off fall camp today. Want to dive into some of the more fascinating storylines that we're going to see play out for this Colorado program. And when you talk about fun programs to follow over the next couple of weeks in fall camp, I'm not sure it gets much better than this Colorado program, where not only are you going year two under Coach Prime, you have a ton of new faces, a ton of talent, getting injected into this program. And over the next 3 to 4 weeks, this is kind of where you figure out who are going to be your difference makers heading into the 2024 season in terms of consistency, week or day in, day out in practice. The bullets start getting a little bit more real. I think this is a fascinating team to kind of monitor during fall camp, fired up to get into a few position battles that I'm keeping my eye on, and also projecting, kind of some breakout players who assert themselves as guys for this Colorado program. Fired up to get into it. Before we do, and as always, just want to say thank you to you guys and to the Colorado fans. It has been an absolute blast for me covering this program in the transfer portal, on the recruiting trail. I can't thank you guys enough for rocking with the fellas. If y'all do enjoy the content, consider subscribing to the channel. I think much more importantly, would love to hear some breakout players for you guys, some of your biggest storylines, because again, that's what we're going to be talking about over the next couple of weeks. And without further ado, let's get into this one. I want to start with, a storyline for Colorado that I think is just kind of flying under the radar. And it's how talented this wide receiver room is. I think a lot of the discussion around this Colorado program either have to do with Shedeur Sanders and Travis Hunter, or if this offensive line is going to be good enough in 2024. I mean, things that we're going to be talking about, no doubt about that. That being said, this wide receiver room, it doesn't get much more talented heading into 2024. What I'm most interested in seeing play out is, how this wide receiver rotation kind of works itself out, where you're bringing a guy like LeJohntay Wester. I think he might be the leading receiver for this Colorado program. You're bringing a guy like Will Sheppard, who's going to be that big physical boundary wide receiver that, made it happen over the last couple of years in the SEC with a program like Vanderbilt that is one of the worst offenses that we see at the Power 5 level. What does the pecking order look like for this wide receiver room? Obviously, Travis Hunter, Jimmy Horn Jr. Now, I would probably predict that you're going to see a lot of 4 wide receiver sets for Colorado, where, most programs kind of run 11 personnel, 1 running back, 1 tight end. I look at, all right, where are the strengths of this Colorado offense? It has a lot to do with the playmakers in this wide receiver room, and not necessarily taking a shot at the tight end position. But if you're Coach Prime and you're this offensive staff and you're looking to maximize the amount of talent on the football field, you probably are going to play with a lot of 4 wide receivers. I would probably predict that this is your starting 4 in terms of Will Sheppard, LeJohntay Wester, Jimmy Horn Jr., and Travis Hunter. Now, a couple of guys that I'm going to be keeping my eyes on. One, Cordell Russell, coming over from TCU, did not enroll in spring practice, so kind of largely an unknown commodity. You look at pictures of this kid, you look at him coming out of high school, physically dripping with talent. Can Cordell Russell put it together and kind of find a way to be an impact wide receiver for this Colorado program? Obviously, Amarian Miller going into year 2. I think Colorado's looking for that bigger boundary wide receiver that can work vertically down the field, a kind of wide receiver that, they didn't really have last year. I think Will Sheppard, Amarian Miller, potentially even Cordell Russell can be that kind of wide receiver for Colorado. And if you get that in 2024, that's just going to open up a lot of area and a lot of space for guys like Travis Hunter and LeJohntay Wester and Jimmy Horn Jr. to really operate in those short intermediate route trees, where that's where they excel. If you can manufacture space for guys like LeJohntay Wester and Jimmy Horn Jr. and Travis Hunter to get the football in space and make people miss, that's kind of the recipe for this Colorado program. I think the next storyline, and it pretty obvious one, the offensive line chemistry. And why I choose to use the word chemistry, you go back 12 months ago, we just kind of had question marks about the personnel for this Colorado offensive line, where they just took a lot of guys from the group of 5 level, some from the FCS, and kind of just put them together. And we weren't necessarily sure if the offensive linemen were even going to be good enough to compete at the Pac-12 level. You go into Colorado's 2024 offensive line, I think the personnel is certainly there. You talk about guys like Justin Mayers or Khalil Benson or Tyler Johnson, all guys that have played big time football, were very highly sought after in the transfer portal. I look at the offensive line and say, from a personnel standpoint, I kind of believe in this unit. I think the bigger question is you have a lot of new faces getting injected into this offensive line, including a true freshman at the left tackle spot. Is the offensive line going to come together as a unit? I believe the personnel is significantly better. Now, can it come together as a 5-man offensive line? Can you figure out the best combination? And can the offensive line come together and play good football in 2024? We're going to find out a little bit about that in fall camp. In terms of position battles, I'm keeping my eye on Tyler Johnson. Again, maybe not slated to start. This was a really good football player for Houston in 2023, which was, again, the Big 12. That was some Power 5 level football, and Tyler Johnson played really good football. You have, at least in my mind, a ton of depth on this offensive line, competitive depth, which Colorado just didn't have last year. So how the offensive line shakes out and how they look from a chemistry standpoint, that's certainly what I'm looking at. Going to number 3, freshman contributors. You brought in some very fascinating freshmen. Let's start at the wide receiver position with Draylon Miller and Cam McCall. Now, Draylon Miller, I kind of made the comment, kind of reminds me of Deebo Samuel coming out of high school in terms of just get the football into his hands, let him go operate, kind of built almost like a running back. Then you have Cam McCall, who might be the fastest player on this Colorado roster. You got 2 really talented wide receivers. Now, I think it's going to be difficult for them to get a ton of playing time in 2024 because of how good at the top the wide receiver room is for Colorado, but I'm certainly keeping my eyes on those 2. Obviously, Jordan Seaton at the left tackle spot. I think the biggest thing for Jordan Seaton, and we said this when he came out of high school, physically, Jordan Seaton is ready to rock and roll. We said that when he was coming out of IMG, probably the most year 1 ready offensive lineman that we saw in the 2024 cycle. Now the question is, can Jordan Seaton put it together consistently every single day in fall camp to kind of show he's going to be a reliable starter at left tackle? And I think the last freshman we got to keep our eyes on is Michael Welch at the running back spot. Everything you hear about this kid, I think there's a lot to be excited about. Obviously, Dallin Hayden coming in, Isaiah Augusta from Arkansas. I think the running back room is deeper and better than it was last year. And you pair that up with an offensive line that we expect to be better. I think Colorado will have some success running the football in 2024, which was a serious problem for Colorado in 2023. Now, the one big storyline that I'm going to be following for Colorado on the defensive side of the football is the defensive line rotation. I think where you want to start is this unit is significantly more talented than it was last year. You kind of go back to last year, Jordan Dominic, probably your best pass rusher on the defensive line. I don't even know if Jordan Dominic would be in the top 3 of pass rushers going into this year. That kind of sounded like a ricochet shot at Jordan Dominic. Certainly wasn't meant to be. I think it's more just a highlight. Colorado has some dudes coming in who can get after the passer, highlighted by BJ Green and Deion Hayes. I would be extremely surprised if those are not your 2 starting edge rushers for Colorado heading into the 2024 season. But I think what I'm more kind of curious about, what's the depth of this defensive line look like? Obviously, that was the big bugaboo for Colorado last year. I'm a believer in the depth. You talk about Samuel Okunlola, one of the better edge rushers for Pitt last year. He's probably going to be in the 2 deep. Keaton Wade coming over from Kentucky. You have Quincy Wiggins, who we haven't seen him play a ton of football, but is dripping with physical talent going into year 3. Can he start to put it together? I look at the depth at the edge rusher spot and say, we're feeling pretty good all the way going into the 3 deep. And then you look on the inside and say, Chidozi's probably going to be a lock to start on the inside of the defensive line. Now the question is, what is going to be the rotation looking like the rest of the way? Rayan Buell has garnered a lot of attention during this offseason coming from Ohio. I think he certainly can play. Torian Carter has done it at the SEC level at Arkansas. You look at Anquan Barnes coming from Alabama. You have guys like Amari McNeil and Shane Coates coming back. At the very least, you feel much better about the 2 and 3 deep on the inside of the defensive line as well. Now the question is, who kind of emerges as the guys that are going to get a lot of playing time for Colorado on the defensive line. But I think the biggest storyline is you finally have some competitive depth in this Colorado team heading into 2024, where along the line of scrimmage last year, they just kind of had to play with what they had. They didn't really have much depth or competition. I think that's the biggest difference between this Colorado team. And quite frankly, the difference that a lot of people are not recognizing about this Colorado program either. You look at the linebacker spot, I would expect Nikhai Hill-Green to emerge as a starter. This is a guy that I know as a Michigan fan myself. I know quite a lot about Nikhai Hill-Green. I think he's a very quality Power 4 caliber linebacker. I would expect him and Levante Bentley to be your starters, but you have guys like John Chaney, Jalen Wester coming in. There's some competitive competition in the linebacker room. And then you look at the secondary. I think we know what this secondary is going to look like. DJ McKinney, Travis Hunter, Preston Hodge, probably your 3 cornerbacks, and Shiloh and Cameron Silman-Craig as your safeties. I don't think we have much question mark about that. I think the biggest storyline for that is, can that unit come together? Because, again, on paper, that's a really talented unit. They gave up some explosive plays last year, which, kind of makes sense considering that was a brand new secondary, the chemistry. And obviously, we don't think Charles Kelly did a great job with that. That was one of the bigger question marks. Does this secondary play a little bit to get better together as a unit, kind of similar to the conversation we have about the offensive line, where those are 2 units that not only do you want really good players in the unit, you got to have guys on the same page. Those are my storylines for Colorado heading into fall camp. A lot to talk about over the next couple of weeks. Appreciate you guys rocking with the fellas. Again, if y'all do enjoy the content, consider subscribing to the channel. Much more importantly, would love to hear some of your storylines for this program in the comments section. Appreciate you guys rocking with it, and we'll talk to y'all later. Peace.